We've got a story for you today that honestly sounds like it's pulled from a legend. It's about a river that was literally moved, a project worth billions that completely fell apart, and a legal showdown that went all the way to the highest court in the world. So, let's dive in.
I mean, think about that for a second. Can a country just decide to move a river? It sounds impossible, right? A river is this massive force of nature. It's a border. It's a lifeline for millions. Surely you can't just reroute it.
Well, in October 1992, that's exactly what happened. Czechoslovakia dammed the mighty Danube River, the one that forms its border with Hungary, and siphoned off about 80% of its water into a brand new canal, built completely on their own land.
Now, this wasn't some sudden, out-of-the-blue decision. It was actually the breaking point of a dispute that had been simmering for years between these two neighboring countries.
You see, for Hungary, this was a massive violation of its territory. But for Czechoslovakia, it was the only possible way to save a gigantic investment that Hungary had just walked away from. To really get how we got to this point, we have to rewind a bit.
So what was this project that caused so much drama? It all goes back to 1977, with a treaty that was signed in a totally different political world.
The 1977 treaty laid out this incredibly ambitious vision. They called it a single and indivisible system. And the goals were huge. We're talking massive amounts of clean energy, making the river safer for ships, and protecting the whole area from floods. This was meant to be a true 50-50 partnership, with two dams, one in Czechoslovakia, one in Hungary, designed to be owned and run together from the very beginning.
But as you know, by the late 1980s, the world in Central Europe was changing, and changing fast. And as politics shifted, so did public opinion about this project, especially in Hungary.
Then, in May 1989, the Hungarian government did something pretty shocking. It just stopped all work on its side of the project. Their justification was based on this specific legal idea. They called it a state of ecological necessity, basically arguing the environmental threat was so bad they had no other choice.
And these weren't just vague worries, you know? They had a whole list of potential catastrophes. They were afraid the huge reservoir would turn into stagnant, polluted water, threatening the drinking supply for millions. They were worried that the way the dam would operate would create these destructive artificial tides on the river every single day, wiping out entire ecosystems. To them, this wasn't progress. It was an ecological disaster waiting to happen.
You can imagine Czechoslovakia was not happy. They were furious, actually. From their perspective, Hungary had just walked away from a legally binding treaty, leaving this multi-billion-dollar project half-finished. They felt like they had to do something.
So they cooked up their own incredibly bold plan. They called it a provisional solution, or Variant C. And the whole point was that they could finish it all by themselves, without any help from Hungary.
So this set up two totally opposing arguments. Hungary was claiming ecological necessity, that the danger was so real they had to stop. Czechoslovakia shot back saying, no, your illegal breach forced us to create a countermeasure, Variant C, to prevent a financial and environmental catastrophe from this half-built dam.
And things just spiraled from there. And I mean, fast. In May '89, Hungary stops working. By late '91, Czechoslovakia starts building their own version. Hungary responds by saying, fine, the treaty is over. And just 5 months after that, the Danube gets dammed. With no other options, they agreed to take the whole mess to the world's highest court.
So the case lands at the International Court of Justice, which now has to figure this all out. They focused on 3 core questions. And frankly, the answers surprised pretty much everyone.
All right, question number 1 for the court. Was Hungary even allowed to stop working on the project back in 1989?
Hungary's entire defense rested on this state of necessity idea. Now, this is a real thing in international law, but the bar to prove it is incredibly high. You have to show that something essential, like your nation's environment, is being threatened by a danger that is both grave and imminent, and that stopping work was the only possible way to deal with it.
So what did the court decide? A big, clear no. They agreed that Hungary's environmental concerns were real and important, but they found the dangers weren't quite grave and imminent enough back in 1989. They were more uncertain, more long-term. So the high legal bar wasn't met, and Hungary was wrong to stop the work.
Okay, so if Hungary was in the wrong, does that mean Czechoslovakia was right when it built a dam and moved the Danube?
And the court's answer was also no. They said, look, even though Czechoslovakia was responding to an illegal act by Hungary, their countermeasure, siphoning off 80 to 90% of a shared international river, was way over the top. It wasn't proportional. It basically stole Hungary's right to its fair share of the Danube's water. So now both countries had acted unlawfully.
So that leads us to the last and maybe the most important question. After all of this back and forth, was the original 1977 treaty even still a thing? Hungary sent a letter officially killing it, but did that actually work? And in a wild twist, the court said no for a third time. They ruled that Hungary's letter was premature. But more importantly, the court made it clear that you can't just tear up a treaty because the other side did something wrong too. So despite everything, that 1977 treaty was still alive and kicking.
So let's get this straight. Both countries broke the law, but the treaty that started this whole mess was still legally binding? The court's ruling wasn't just about who to blame. It was about figuring out how to move forward.
And the court's own words really get to the heart of why this matters so much for international law. They warned about disturbing implications if countries could just decide to kill a treaty whenever they felt the other side wasn't holding up their end. It would undermine the whole idea that agreements have to be honored.
So the court didn't just point fingers. It basically gave them a to-do list. It told them to go back to the negotiating table together. They had to figure out a new, joint way to run the dam that was already built. A way that still tried to meet the treaty's original goals, but, and this is key, now had to factor in modern environmental science and the idea of sustainable development. Oh, and they also had to figure out who owed who what for all the damages.
In the end, this whole case became a landmark. It confirmed that international treaties are tough. You can't just toss them aside. But it also showed that they can't be frozen in time. They have to be treated like living documents, flexible enough to adapt to new science, new standards, and new challenges, especially when it comes to protecting the planet.
And that leaves us with a huge question we are still grappling with today. In a world that's changing faster than ever, how do we honor the binding, long-term promises we make to each other, while also adapting to what we're learning every day about our responsibility to the environment?